may be out for the summer, but if your child has food allergies, now is the time to start thinking about back to school. Yes, already. Today, we're covering everything you need to know to help your child have a safe and successful school year. We talk about updating anaphylaxis action plans, choosing the right epinephrine device for your child, 504 plans, and helping your kiddos build the confidence to speak up. So whether you're new to food allergies or a seasoned pro, this episode has something for you. This podcast is made in partnership with the Allergy and Asthma Network. We want to thank ARS Pharma for sponsoring today's episode. While they support the show, all opinions are our own and sponsorship doesn't influence our content or editorial decisions. Any mentions of brands is for informational purposes only and not an endorsement. Now let's get into it. You're listening to The Itch, a podcast exploring all things allergy, asthma, and immunology.
Today, we are super excited because we have another great friend and colleague on, Dr. Nicole Chase. Nicole, can you please introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, I'm Nicole Chase. I'm a board-certified allergist immunologist in Minneapolis, St. Paul. I have a private practice. I also work at the Minneapolis VA Allergy Clinic, although my views expressed here are my own and not those on behalf of the VA. I see predominantly, probably majority children, maybe 60%, 40%, but I love taking care of patients with allergies because I feel like they are generally healthy people that we really just get to tune up nicely and keep them going for a long time. So thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here.
We're excited to have you. Welcome. Well, today we're talking about how to prepare before school starts. And it's like, okay, school just got out. Why do we have to think about the next year already? Well, if you have food allergies, you kind of have to because you want to have certain accommodations in the school. And those accommodations come with the help of your allergist. So we're going to talk about what you need to do before the school season starts and maybe why you want to get to it now before summer madness hits. And the next thing you know, you're packing your kid up and school has started and you forgot to get those forms filled out. So that's what we're talking about. I think the best way to start is I explained why I think it's important, but Dr. Chase, why do you think it's important for parents to really get this in their head now and think about preparing for the next school year?
Yeah, I think that especially when you're talking about children, it's always better to start early because things generally take longer than you expect. We know that the, amount of kids that have food allergies is increasing. And I feel like there's always a line of people that need to get in to talk to the school. I find that a lot of times the school administrators or the school nurses and things, they take some time off in the summer too. So it's really nice to get ahead, I think, just for peace of mind. I also think that as an allergist, August is a really lovely disaster with school forms. We tell our patients we like to have 7 to 10 business days to actually get these forms done. Sometimes I can't do them the same day, but sometimes I have a stack of 30 of them in any given day. And so it's really nice to think about all the moving parts here and give each one a little bit of time to get things done. I definitely still get requests from parents for like, I need this tomorrow. And while we can really try our best, it's not ideal because we're still working on a regular basis, seeing other patients. The other thing is I feel like with food allergy, there's always a component of worry. And I think that checking off some of these checkboxes early can really start to just soothe your sense of, okay, what do I need to do to really feel prepared? I think if you're rushing and doing it at the last minute, it always is going to feel more stressful. And I think that that does lead to anxiety. So whether you're thinking about getting those forms in to your allergist for your updated anaphylaxis action plan, whether you're thinking about getting refills requested for your epinephrine device, the pharmacies sometimes have a huge rush before back to school. And so it's important to make certain that if you want a certain device, you need to get that sooner than later. And then especially if you're, new to making a 504 plan or otherwise meeting with your school administrators, you want to make certain that you have time to get on their schedule. As much as we all think about food allergies a lot, and it occupies a lot of our mind space, they have a lot of other things going on. So I would say being proactive just works for so many reasons. And then you'll feel better when it's that week before back to school and you can really just focus on loving your kids as much as possible and preparing yourself for the impending, maybe tears as you send them off to school, especially those littlest ones going to kindergarten for the first time.
Thank you so much for going through that. And you mentioned 504 plans. Can you talk a little bit more about what those are and why somebody with a food allergy might want to consider getting one of those?
Yeah, so a 504 plan really is a written instructional plan that for any school that has public funding, students that have food allergies are actually protected under the Americans with Disabilities Act. And so a 504 plan is kind of like the same equivalent as an instructional plan for someone, let's say, who has some type of impairment, whether that's a visual disability or an auditory disability. It really is a plan where you actually can work with the school to develop set guidelines on how your student with food allergies will be managed during the school year, where they will have epinephrine, who will have access to the epinephrine, is there training that goes along with that, what will be done as far as, in the lunch line and things. And it really is your legal right under Section 504 of the Americans with Disabilities Act for parents to be able to request this and to request a meeting in advance to talk about all of this. So you're not just sending your child off blindly into the forest, so to say. You'll actually know what the expectation is and that everybody has the same set of expectations for the school year.
Thank you for clarifying a 504. I think this is something really important for parents to know about if they don't. And it makes them think about everything that's going to happen within the school setting. So I'd love to just rattle off a couple of things just so that parents have that one more time in their head. What a 504 plan does is it gives you accommodations in the school to make sure that your child is safe with their food allergies. And that can look like where they're going to be sitting at lunchtime. Are they going to be sitting at a separate table, which if you haven't heard some of our episodes, we're not totally fond of, but where are they sitting? If it's a big cafeteria, maybe they're sitting on a table closest to the lunch ladies or the teachers who can supervise them in case anything happens. Where is their epinephrine stored when they're at school? Is it on them or is it with the nurse, or do you have one with them and one at the nurse's office? Is the teacher properly trained to use the epinephrine device? Who knows how to use the epinephrine device? Also, things about class parties, right? If it's going to be a class party with food, you want to know what's going to be served. So does the teacher give you a 1 week's warning and you can then look through all the labels and make the accommodation you need for your child? There's also clear policies sometimes about hand washing and cleaning surfaces if food is eaten in the classroom. So there's all these different things that you're going to go through with your allergist and also with the school to figure out what's going to make you and your child feel comfortable throughout that school year.
Yeah, and one other thing that you want to think about are field trips, events, as Kortney mentioned, but also substitute staff or new staff that might enter the school. How are they notified? So all of these little things, we just want to make sure we're mentioning so that you know what you should be talking to your allergist and to the school about.
There's one other thing that I know that we make with our allergists, and that's called the anaphylaxis action plan. Is that something that you add to the 504 plan? And can you actually just clarify a little bit for us, Dr. Chase, what an anaphylaxis action plan is in case someone's never heard about that?
Sure. So, an anaphylaxis action plan really is a fairly streamlined form. I'm in Minnesota, and we actually worked with our School Nurses Association to make a single form with the help of the local children's hospital so that everybody knows exactly what to expect on the form and everything's always in the same place. So, usually it has the student's name, date of birth. Sometimes there's a place for a picture in settings where that might be helpful. Let's say like nursery schools. It lists the child's allergen or the person's allergens. It also lists if they have a specific preference or if they send a specific epinephrine device, it'll say which one it is, which strength. There sometimes is information on there about other medications that can be used, let's say after epinephrine. But then really it's just a set of guidelines that is supposed to be just read it and act. It's not meant for interpretation. It's supposed to be really clear. So, for example, we have, if you have any type of severe symptom, we want you administering epinephrine right away and then activating EMS services. I think that many forms also contain the contact information, both for the parent as well as for the physician that's managing the allergies. And then sometimes other little useful tidbits. We have some forms where there's a little section whether someone has, instead of a food allergy, maybe they have a venom allergy. And if they've had a prior reaction, sometimes we'll even indicate that even if they're not certain that they were actually exposed, we want them to just administer epinephrine anyway. I think these forms are really great because it does take all of the thinking out of it per se, and people really are just encouraged to act. I think it's also useful for the school nurses to be able to have a reference point to compare what they actually have for a device on hand with what the provider has talked with the family about, just so that there's no surprises for anyone in the event that someone would actually require epinephrine.
Yeah, and we can link some of those in the show notes so people can see what they look like if they've never made one with their allergist. One thing I would love to say is that I like how it works like a guide so you really don't question yourself and just use epinephrine, right? I think sometimes someone needs just that push or to be told just go for it, use epinephrine, and an anaphylaxis action plan definitely does that for people who aren't used to it, like a teacher.
I sometimes joke that I like steal the memes from a certain exercise company and just say like, you don't have to use epinephrine. You get to use epinephrine, right? I feel like with food allergy, there's been this kind of almost fear factor for a long time. And especially with my patients, I'm really big about empowering them because I think about it a little bit selfishly. Like they're going to go off to college someday and I need to sleep well at night. And so the better that they sleep, feeling like really prepared, really confident, the better their parents sleep and then the better that I sleep as well. So I really like the idea of empowering patients with food allergies and their families to be like, you don't need anything else other than your epinephrine device and your anaphylaxis action plan. You have got this.
So, one thing that I'd like to clarify is that the allergist isn't actually filling out that 504 form. What's happening is that you're having that conversation during your visit with the allergist just about all the details that you might want to discuss when you're having that 504 meeting. So that's also why it's important to book your visit with your allergist early, and that should come first so that you can discuss all of these things and just feel comfortable with what you think you want and need at school. And then what happens is that you schedule an appointment with your school or whatever process they have for filling out the 504 forms. And that is a conversation between you as a family and the school. Nikki, do you have anything else to add?
So our son has a speech impediment. And so he has a similar kind of thing. And basically what happens is you have to contact the school and they actually help you fill it out. So we don't actually, as an allergist, I don't fill out the 504. I just do the anaphylaxis action plan. And then the school works with the family to make sure that they all agree on the 504. Because I think sometimes parents are like, I would like my child to sit here and do all of this. And the school may be like, we don't have enough staff for that. So it's got to be a little bit of a mutual conversation between what the school can actually offer to the family and also what they've done before and what's worked for other parents. Just because sometimes you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You actually can realize, oh, another family before us had actually the same situation and what we did for them. That's great. Let's just duplicate that again.
So, one topic that we need to cover, and we kind of talked about this in our Age and Stages episodes, is when do you usually have that conversation about when to self carry? Because I know we mentioned that are we having the child carry their epinephrine or is it stored? Well, how does that conversation go with families? And how does that conversation look different now that we have other forms of epinephrine device?
Yeah, it's a great question. I do think that, like most things in medicine, it needs to be personalized. But my general rule is that I start talking with families at a very, very young age about doing kind of, semi carrying when they're very, very little, even. I mean, even as young as 5 years old, sometimes I'll say, let's just pretend that you're going out for dinner or you're going to a picnic or going to a friend's house. I think it would be a great idea for you to at least let your child carry the little bag or pouch or whatever you actually have that holds your epinephrine, just so that not only are they aware that, hey, we bring this with us all the time, but they actually feel that sense of, knowing that they have their sort of antidote with them all the time. And I think that really just getting them used to the idea that, oh, this just always goes with us really preps them for when they get older. My general rule is by the age of 10, I want all of my patients to be self-carrying. Now, this is where you need to have a little bit of knowledge of your patients and, conversation with the child as well as with the families. But I think that there are lots of in-between steps, like, you're the one that remembers to grab it whenever we leave the house. And then as a parent, you kind of do a little bit of trust but verify, especially with the epinephrine devices that are available now. We have auto-injectors in various forms, whether it be kind of a long barrel-shaped epinephrine device. We have some that are more of like a very thick credit card device. And then I think now we actually have an epinephrine nasal spray, which is quite small, about maybe 2 inches by 1 inch. And I think that for some families, it's become that they actually want to now just kind of affix this inside the backpack or inside some area of their their purse, their pocketbook, etc. But I think it's important to remember that even if it lives somewhere, we want to have kids having the opportunity to self-carry. With this new epinephrine nasal spray device, I really think that there's a lot of familiarity in the community. This is the same device that is actually has been created in some part to actually deliver naloxone, which is an opioid reversal medication. And so I think there's actually quite a bit of community familiarity with using this nasal spray device. I feel like the kind of smaller that these devices have become, the more and more I find that adults are willing to carry them, children are willing to carry them, and especially the hardest group to get to carry epinephrine devices is my teenage adolescent boys, because they just don't want to have a shoulder bag or anything else. So I think that now having these choices for patients, for families, and having the sizes vary, it's really become a really fun kind of shared decision conversation to see. I always tell them, I don't actually care which one you pick. I really don't. I just want you to tell me what prescription to give for you, because what I really want is for you to use it. So whatever works for you, that's what works for me.
And I think that having more options, I always love that, no matter what disease state we're talking about. And so it's really nice that we're getting more creative with the way that epinephrine is delivered. And one of the things that we always worry about is that because the other devices are injectable, it's a needle. Sometimes people, like school staff, administrators, other lay people, get worried about injecting somebody else or somebody else's child. And so here now we have this nasal epinephrine device, which, if it's available, may help people not feel as kind of hesitant to treat a reaction early, which we know is so important. Having options is always so important and so great.
I totally agree. And I think that one of the things that I find really nice about the epinephrine nasal spray in particular, well, maybe a couple of things that I find really nice about the epinephrine nasal spray is that number one, they actually have studied it in any position, meaning that if someone needs epinephrine and they have a nasal spray device, you can administer it while they're seated, while they're lying down. I sometimes will joke with, patients in the office, like, you could even be standing on your head and you could receive this, because it really is a nasal spray. It's not a sinus spray. And this is why the instructions are that we don't want you to sniff. We don't really want this being delivered to the back of your nasopharynx, so like between your nose and your throat. We want this to actually be in your nose. And so these are why the instructions are as they are. I also think that this is the first time where we've had data that, I'm in Minnesota, people accidentally leave these in cars. And for us, it's more of a freezing risk. And so we've been told by the company that if it does actually freeze, if it's frozen solid, it won't spray. But if it thaws, it's actually supposed to be fine. And that they've studied it for up to 3 months, actually at 122 degrees Fahrenheit. So I think for those families that are like, we just have multiple drop offs, pickups, all the things, if it were to be left in a car for a bit, that I think that families would feel much more comfortable and not feel like they have to replace it right away. And then the thing that I've heard from parents is that it has a 2-year expiration in most cases. And that as much as I want them to be using more epinephrine, really, I want them to use it at, I joke, like, just ask for forgiveness instead of asking for permission. Just take it if you even think you might need to use it. I think that they feel like, wow, with sometimes cost being a major factor in what medications they can get for themselves or their children, that having a 2-year expiration is really lovely.
Yeah, absolutely. And then one other thing that people are worried about with the nasal device is that, will it work if I'm really congested? So some people have underlying allergies, environmental allergies, and then they're worried, if I'm really congested, will it work? And is it still safe? And yes, those studies were also done. And we know that congestion actually does not prohibit the absorption. In fact, it may even help increase it. So it is not going to interfere with the absorption.
Like both of you have said, it's really exciting to have more options. I know that in Germany, where I live, it's currently not an option. So it's not something we can talk to our allergists about. Actually, I went to my allergist and I was like, I'd like a nose epinephrine, please. And he had no idea what I was talking about, but I think it's changing slowly. But what I think is good is that we can actually have proper shared decision making now with patients and doctors, because sometimes people need that idea of an injection. I think it's also a psychological thing. So there is that ability to say, here, you can have the injection if you want the injection, because something about needle just also tells you something different. And maybe that's like the psychological aspect of, I'm like injecting myself, therefore I'm going to get better. So that's still that option if that's what you need. And especially I think as a teenager or someone who hasn't had the nasal spray as an option, we're still maybe concerned about that. So it's still something you can talk to your doctor about. And I think that maybe when you are going to get your forms this summer, this is a topic you can bring up and you can loop your kid in and say, how do you feel? Do you think you'll use this more than this one? How do you think you can train your friends with it? How do you think your teachers will feel being trained with it? So you can really loop in all of these different people that should also know how to use the epinephrine device, whatever it is.
Absolutely. Thanks for mentioning, Kortney, the anxiety surrounding food allergies, which is just such an important topic that we need to address in every conversation regarding food allergy. But even in this one, some people may feel more comfortable with an injectable device. And that's where, again, shared decision making comes into play. Now, shifting gears a little bit, we have talked about what we're doing with the allergist, with the school. And now we want to talk a little bit about summer with our kids. What can we teach them over the summer regarding their food allergies?
Yeah, I think that for most families that summertime is, strangely maybe just as busy as during the school year. But I think that there are a couple of key points that I love to reinforce and I ask parents to reinforce when they're not in clinic with me, which is that I usually tell kids with food allergies that there are two rules that we really need for them to follow just to make sure that we keep their bodies safe. One is that we always wash our hands before and after we eat. And I think that we've just been through a pandemic. Like, this is just a good idea in general. And most kids agree that they understand the rationale for this. Really try and reinforce to families that for most children, really contact with a food allergen is not going to give them a life-threatening reaction, but it's really more so ingestion or contact with kind of the mucous membrane surfaces, so mouth, eyes. So if you wash your hands, even if someone had smeared peanut butter all over the playground equipment, which of course we hope absolutely never happens, that those children would still be safe because they've cleaned their hands from any allergens before eating. I also remind kids that it's never okay to share food with friends. This could be for your own food allergy. It could be for your friend's food allergy. And also, when parents pack lunches, they really put the utmost love into what they're giving to their own child. And it really is just meant for them. But I remind kids that some snacks may look really exciting. And so absolutely, you should feel free to think about that and go home and tell your parents, like, I saw this thing. It looked amazing. Could we have this? Is it safe for me? The other thing that I like to tell kids, especially with food allergies, is that they actually have two privileges that are really unique to them. And that overall, other kids that don't have food allergies don't get these privileges. And I try and make it kind of fun and funny so that they really remember this. But the first one is that I remind them that we really worry about their bodies getting really sick if they eat something that they're allergic to. And so I tell them that putting something into your mouth is a way to taste it, but eating it really means swallowing it. So I love to remind them that if they put something into their mouth that they think actually they might be allergic to, if it tastes funny, if it feels funny in their lips and their tongue, etc., I tell them that they actually have my permission to not be polite and not use a napkin or just swallow it, but actually to spit it out. And I love to joke and say, you have my permission to spit it out, even if it goes on the principal's shoes. To really emphasize to them that I mean it. Don't swallow something if you think you might be allergic to it. And I usually joke with them and pretend to be the principal and ask, what happened? And when they say, well, my doctor told me that if I ever put something in my mouth that I thought I might be allergic to, she said that I could just spit it out and pretend that then the principal is very happy that they did this, just to reinforce that it is okay to break certain rules in certain situations. The other privilege that I love to tell them is that, for some kids, there's just so much anxiety with being at school where other kids don't practice the same kind of careful rules that they might at home. Some families don't have their food allergens in their home. And so going to school can be really scary, especially where we have situations where a lot of kids are eating, let's say, peanut butter and jelly sandwiches if their schools are not nut-free, for example. I tell them that even in a situation where they've been told to sit still, sit in their seat, that if someone ever gets too close to them with something that they're allergic to or makes them feel uncomfortable, that they have my permission to actually get up out of their seat and go tell a grown-up. And I give the example that even if you were sitting through a presentation by the King of England, that you could actually get up out of your chair and go talk to a teacher if someone was too close to you with your food allergen. And I really like to kind of role play this and pretend to say, what are you doing? That's not okay. And then when you explain, my doctor told me it was okay to tell an adult if someone got too close to me with one of my food allergens, that the teacher is then very, very happy that they did that. I've had instances where children have come back to their seat after doing something to find a peanut on their chair. And so this is always a good time for me to reinforce also that food bullying is a thing. And sometimes people do things that they think are funny that are not actually funny. And that's teasing or bullying. And so those are things that you really want to tell a parent, a teacher, and then really to me, I have a policy of zero tolerance. And so if I hear from a parent or from a child that there has been any evidence of bullying or teasing, I don't go to the teacher. I don't go to the principal. I write a letter directly to the superintendent reminding them of the Americans with Disabilities Act and requesting that they contact the family and then actually report back to me. I feel like as physicians, we have a lot of power in this regard, and we really need to be using it to make certain that we don't have to write these letters very often because these things are just not.
This is why I love doing this podcast. I love hearing how other colleagues, doctors, providers talk to their patients. It is so fun to hear how we've all put together our messaging. And I always walk away with ideas. So, Nikki, I know that your patients love you. I've heard so many great things about everyone in the field about how great you are. And I can see it and feel it as you're talking and giving us tips on how we should be talking to our patients and the messages that we should be giving. So thank you. And thanks for sharing it with all of our audience and our patients. One other thing that I like to practice that you've already alluded to earlier in one of your answers was having them be the carrier. And especially during the summer when you're going on summer trips and all this kind of stuff. I know with my almost 5-year-old that he's old enough to do things like this. You know, he loves being in charge of his travel bag and getting everything ready and making sure everything's in there. And so they are really ready at such a young age to take on that responsibility, doing that kind of process of understanding that they always have to do that double check when they're leaving the house. And then also starting that process of how do we use it? When do we use it? What kind of symptoms do we need to be aware of? And then, of course, practicing advocating for yourself, even at restaurants, cafes, other places that you're going to, camps, and always saying to everyone, especially new people that you're meeting over the summer, that I have a food allergy. These are the things that I'm allergic to. Please make sure that anything that I'm eating doesn't have that food. And also doing that every single time someone's trying to give you food.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And I feel like this really goes back to the conversation you guys had about ages and stages. I think that if we empower our patients and children and families that have food allergies to know how to order food at restaurants, I tell people the same thing. You have to practice this. This is not easy. Kids find it really hard to tell grown-ups what to do. And so if you practice saying, I have a food allergy, or even I sometimes tell them it's okay sometimes to scare grown-ups a little bit to say, like, I have a life-threatening food allergy. Now, you know you have the antidote in your pocket, and you know that if you take it, it really does fix everything for you. But at the same time, sometimes you really need to get grown-ups' attention, like at a restaurant. And I remind families that this is just a transaction. When you're at a restaurant, basically you're just trading your money for someone to cook you food. So there's no need to feel any way about it. You have as much right as everyone else to be standing there in line, requesting them to make your food safe for you. So I think those are good things to practice over the summertime as well, in addition to safe carrying practices.
Yeah, we talked about this in the last episode, but everyone wants to keep you safe. So the person at the restaurant, every single person around you does not want to have a situation where you're feeling sick. So that's also really important to remember is that you're never imposing because at the end of the day, nobody wants to have an emergency situation in their restaurant or their cafe or anywhere.
And I think that translates really nicely to the school with whoever supervises in the lunchroom. I know that when I was a child, I know I was, I was in elementary school in the 90s. So that was a very different landscape. We ran into the most trouble with the lunchroom supervisors because at that point, they didn't really believe in food allergy. But at this point, we know a lot of kids have food allergies. So there's more than just one kid. But I think that if you practice over the summer to speak up at restaurants and with other adults around you, it will give you that ability when your parent isn't around to do it in the school setting, to talk to the lunch supervisors, to talk to your teacher. Sometimes they're overwhelmed because there's hundreds of kids running around and they might not have the time or the patience for you. But if you use your strong words and if you have practiced them, then you will feel more confident to say, look, this isn't okay. This person is bullying me, or I'm not feeling good. Please, I need to use my epinephrine. So I think that that's really nice, is to use the summertime to get comfortable speaking up for yourself, so that when your parent isn't around, you can talk to adults. Because sometimes as a kid, talking to adults can feel scary. Who's not your teacher, you don't want to talk to them, but this will give you more confidence, hopefully.
Yeah. And I think one last detail, just this is such a great conversation. I feel like one last detail that I like to remind people about is during the school year, you have routines. During the summer, the routines, many of them, you have either changes in them or they just go out the window. So I love the idea of a mantra when people leave the house. I said when I was a resident, I would say keys, money, phone, ID, pager. And if I didn't have any of those things, I would have a really bad day at the hospital working to take care of little kids. And so I encourage them, you're going to be leaving your house at weird times a lot more than you ever have during the school year. So if you say keys, money, phone, epi, you'll always be certain that even if it's a strange time that you're leaving or a 1 day camp or something like that, that you always know when you get to the threshold of your house, you say those words to make certain that you always have all the things you need and you put epi in the list, but say it out loud so your kids can hear you say it and then they can help say it also.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I still totally do that. I will have my door open and I will stand on the threshold, and I actually have to, I don't know if this is like a weird tick, but I have to touch everything. So I have to touch my epinephrine device, and I have to touch my wallet, and I have to touch my keys, and then I can zip up my bag and close the door. So I don't necessarily say it, but I touch three things and then I can go. It just gives you peace of mind, and then you don't feel like you're 10 minutes away from your house and you're like, "Oh shoot, did I forget something?"
Yeah, these kids are many of them are gonna be driving before we know it, and if they get anywhere without their phone or their money or their key, like, they're just not gonna be in a good place. I think this is a good rule for life in general. I feel like a lot of what I talk to patients about with food allergy, like, these are just rules for existence. Like, if you make a mistake, that's okay, but let's not follow it up with another not so great choice or another mistake. You're allowed to make one mistake or one not so great choice, but then the next thing you do has to be a good choice. And I think especially with food allergy, that really, really applies. If you accidentally eat something, it's okay. We're not upset with you, but then don't go hide in a bathroom someplace and not tell anybody. You want to do the right thing afterwards.
Absolutely. And I really like that touching it because sometimes in your head, you're like, oh, yeah, I did take that, but you didn't, right? It wasn't actually in your bag. So see it, feel it, touch it is a great also additional aspect to the mantra because sometimes you can say, oh, yeah, I have my keys and this and that, but then you didn't actually put them in your bag. So I like that touch concept. And lastly, remember, if you don't have your epinephrine device, you cannot use it. So that is why we're so persistent on making sure that you have it. It is the most important thing, the only thing that can help you if you accidentally get exposed to the food that you're allergic to. And another reminder is that nobody purposely eats the food that they're allergic to. So these are always situations that are surprises, and you want to be ready for those surprises that will hopefully never occur, but could. So that's what we're doing here. And it's just like putting a seatbelt on in the car. You're hopefully never going to get into a car accident, but that one time that something happens and you need that seatbelt on. So it's really your seatbelt for food allergies. And so, Nikki, can you give us your last parting tips that you want to share with the audience on this topic?
I think that my favorite thing to do is really just to take away the fear factor of living with food allergies. I tell parents, patients all the time, you have all the power. And I tell kids, I look them right in the eye and say, there are a lot of amazing grown-ups in your world, but I only trust you. Because I know that for you, when you think about eating, we eat so much food in America, right? You did a good job. You should eat something. You did a bad job. Why don't you eat something? You're sad. Why don't you have something to have a treat, right? You're feeling happy. Let's go out for a celebration. I tell them, I only trust you. I think most kids would agree that, and most adults, even with food allergy, would agree that when they look at food, there's a split second thought that goes through their mind that's like, oh, this doesn't have nuts in it, or this doesn't have my allergen in it. And so I really want them to know they have all the power, they hold all the cards. It's okay to be hungry and to skip food if you're not sure it's safe. It's okay to taste something that you think should be safe as long as you have your epi with you, right? You don't have to live in a bubble. You just have to be a little bit prepared. But once you feel that empowerment, you really are absolutely in control of what's going on with you in your life. And I really like, especially telling kids that, because they always think, oh my gosh, you only trust me? Like, you're a grown up and a doctor. And I think that everything we can do to empower them helps their parents feel less anxious and helps their parents really go along that same line of thinking of like, you know what, kids are really smart. Kids with food allergies grow up a little bit earlier than everybody else does. And at the same time, we can absolutely use that to the best advantage and keep these kids safe and also let them have the most otherwise, regular life as possible, even knowing that food is just such a prevalent factor in our existence. So that's my last little tip for everybody there. I have all these little random, memes and things, but I'll leave it at that.
I love that. I think that's so important for kids to feel like they have ownership of their own food allergies, because that will only help them when they grow up and they are on their own. And also, you let them create the rules around food. And I think that's important, because if they can create their own rules around food, they will stick to them and they will stay true to following those rules instead of being told what to do. I love that. I think that was, for me, that's one of the biggest things as an adult who's only lived with food allergies, is give kids power in their food allergy world so that you as a parent can trust that they're going to do it and they feel excited and they want to take care of themselves and they want to make sure that they're safe because they're the ones who get to do it.
Absolutely. The key to being treated like a grown up, I tell kids all the time, is the art of negotiation. If you figure out what's important to your parents and they figure out what's important to you, that's the place where you actually can decide, okay, you know what? My parents really seem to think that me having this epinephrine is important. I'm going to make this important to me too. And then I'm going to tell them, look, if you ask me on any given date, am I carrying it? If my answer is always yes, at some point, I know my parents are going to stop asking me because they know that I always have it. This is how they start to have that kind of sense of mutual respect, and really how you can actually start to be seen as more of an adult in your parents' eyes and as someone that's responsible.
This is why I didn't have a curfew and my sister did.
I love that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much again, Nikki, for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us and sharing all of your super helpful tips. We really appreciate you.
Thanks for having me. I had a great time chatting with you all.
Thank you. And we'll have lots of different links in our show notes for action plan and things that you need as a parent. So if you're looking for resources, we've got you covered there. There's lots and lots and lots of things that will help you out if you're a little bit stressed and it's your first time dealing with a 504 plan.
Thank you for listening to today's episode. Remember that all information you hear today is for informational purposes only and are not intended to serve as a substitute for the consultation, diagnosis, and/or medical treatment of a qualified physician or healthcare provider. And also, don't forget to subscribe to our podcast. And if you have a second, help spread the word by rating our podcast and sharing with your friends and family who might also be interested in learning more about allergies, asthma, and immunology. You can always stay up to date by checking out our Instagram, The Itch Podcast, where you can leave questions you are itching to know, or check out our website, which is www.itchpodcast.com, which contains more information about the subjects we covered in today's episode and every episode. Until next time, have a fabulous week.